When Margaret Johnson receives an unexpected invitation to her son Aaron's wedding after years of silence, she hopes it's a chance to reconnect. But what awaits her is far from a happy reunion. In the midst of lavish celebrations, Margaret uncovers shocking secrets about Aaron's life, a mysterious child, and the family he's about to marry into. What has been hidden from her and Aaron all these years? And how far will Margaret go to protect her son and reclaim the family she once knew? Stay tuned for this emotional journey of love, betrayal, and redemption. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment below. What would you do if faced with a life-changing truth? Let's dive in. The quiet village of Maplewood basked in the late afternoon sun, its cobblestone streets lined with charming homes that bore the marks of decades, if not centuries of life. In one of these homes, Margaret Johnson sat by the window of her modest living room, a worn yet cozy space filled with the scent of lavender polish and the faint remnants of the cookies she'd baked that morning. Margaret's home reflected her life simple, hard-working, and full of love. The faded curtains framing the window had once been vibrant green, a wedding gift from her late husband, Robert. The furniture, though old, was well-maintained, and the walls were adorned with photographs chronicling the story of her family. One particular photo on the mantel caught Margaret's eye as she rocked gently in her chair. It was of her son, Aaron, taken the day of his high school graduation. He stood tall and proud, his arm draped around her shoulders, his smile so full of hope and determination. Aaron had always been her joy, her pride. She'd raised him alone after Robert passed, pouring every ounce of love and energy into ensuring he had a good life. She worked double shifts at the diner, saved every penny, and sacrificed her own comfort so Aaron could have opportunities she never dreamed of. But as the years went on, and Aaron grew into the man she always knew he could be, the distance between them also grew. At first, it was physical college in another state, followed by a promising career in the city. Then it became emotional. The weekly calls dwindled to monthly check-ins and finally, to rare and impersonal texts. 3 years had passed since Aaron last visited Maplewood, and Margaret's hope for his return had faded into a dull ache. A sharp knock on the door broke her reverie. Setting aside the blanket she'd been knitting, Margaret stood, her knees creaking with the effort. She opened the door to see Ted, the town's mailman, standing on her porch with his usual friendly smile. "Afternoon, Mrs. Johnson," Ted said, holding out a small stack of mail. "Afternoon, Ted," Margaret replied, taking the envelopes from him. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "It is," Ted agreed, tipping his hat. "Hope there's some good news in there for you." Margaret nodded politely, though her heart wasn't particularly optimistic. She closed the door and carried the mail to her small kitchen table, sorting through the usual assortment of bills and advertisements. Then her hands stilled. Among the mundane envelopes was a thick, cream-colored one, its texture rich and weighty. Her name and address were written in elegant golden script. Mrs. Margaret Johnson. Curious, Margaret opened the envelope carefully, pulling out an intricately designed card. Her breath caught as she read the words inside. "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Aaron Johnson and Emily Carter." Her heart raced, her hands trembling as she reread the invitation. Aaron was getting married. Her son, who hadn't visited in years, was reaching out. For a moment, joy swelled in her chest. Was this an olive branch? A chance to reconnect and repair the bond they once shared? But just as quickly, doubt crept in. Why hadn't Aaron called her directly? Why had he sent such an impersonal invitation instead of sharing the news himself? Margaret's gaze drifted back to Aaron's graduation photo. "Oh, Aaron," she murmured, her voice heavy with emotion. "What's happened to us?" That evening, Margaret sat by the fire, her knitting abandoned as her thoughts wandered through the years. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, illuminating the many memories that filled her home. She thought of Aaron as a boy bright-eyed, curious, and full of energy. He had a passion for building things, spending hours in the backyard assembling forts from scraps of wood and plastic tarps. "Someday, I'll build us a real house, Mom," he'd say, his face beaming with excitement. "One with a big porch where you can sit and knit all day." Margaret had always encouraged his dreams, even as she worked herself to exhaustion to support them. She took every extra shift she could at the diner, her feet aching from standing all day, her hands raw from scrubbing pots and pans. But when Aaron came home with a smile, sharing stories of school projects and plans for the future, every ache and sacrifice felt worthwhile. One memory stood out among the rest. Aaron was 16, and they'd just received the news that he'd been accepted into a prestigious summer program for engineering. The tuition was steep, and Margaret didn't have the money to spare. But she refused to let him miss the opportunity. "I'll figure it out," she had told him, her voice firm despite the uncertainty gnawing at her. And she did. She worked extra shifts, sold some of Robert's old tools, and even dipped into the emergency fund she'd been saving for years. The look on Aaron's face when she handed him the acceptance packet was worth every penny. "I'll make it up to you, Mom," Aaron had promised, his voice earnest. "Someday, I'll make you proud." "You already do," Margaret had replied, pulling him into a tight hug. But as Aaron grew older and his ambitions carried him further from Maplewood, those moments became rarer. The once constant phone calls turned into sporadic texts. His visits home dwindled until they stopped altogether. Margaret told herself it was natural children grow up, pursue their dreams, and find their own paths. But the silence that filled her home felt heavier with each passing year. She missed the sound of Aaron's laughter, the warmth of his presence, and the way he used to look at her, as though she was his whole world. The wedding invitation sat on the coffee table, a symbol of hope and uncertainty. Margaret reached for it, running her fingers over the golden lettering. Was this her chance to mend a rift between them, or would it only deepen the distance? The next morning, Margaret walked to her neighbor Linda's house, seeking the comfort of a familiar presence. Linda had been her closest friend for decades, ever since their children played together in the backyard. Linda greeted her at the door with a warm smile. "Margaret, come in, come in." The two women settled in Linda's cozy kitchen, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. Margaret placed the wedding invitation on the table, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her cardigan. "A wedding, huh?" Linda said, picking up the invitation and examining it closely. "Well, it's about time that boy of yours reached out." Margaret managed a small smile. "I'm not sure what to think. I want to go, but what if I'm just an obligation? What if he doesn't really want me there?" Linda clicked her tongue, setting the invitation down. "Nonsense. He wouldn't have sent this if he didn't want you there. And even if it's just an obligation, it's a chance to see him. A chance to remind him where he comes from." Margaret sighed, her shoulders slumping. "It's been so long, Linda. What if he's changed too much? What if he's forgotten?" She trailed off, unable to voice the fear that had been gnawing at her heart. Linda reached across the table, placing a comforting hand on Margaret's. "You listen to me, Margaret Johnson. You raised that boy with love and sacrifice. He may have forgotten for a while, but deep down he knows. And this wedding might be the perfect opportunity to remind him." Encouraged by Linda's words, Margaret decided she would attend. But as the days passed and the departure date grew closer, her nerves remained a constant companion. On the morning of her departure, Margaret stood in her bedroom, packing the small suitcase she'd used for years. She carefully folded the blue dress she'd found at the thrift store, a simple yet elegant piece that made her feel proud. She paused to look around her room, taking in the familiar sight of the quilt on her bed, the photographs on the dresser, and the vase of wildflowers on the windowsill. This house had been her sanctuary for decades, filled with memories of love and loss. "Time to go," she whispered to herself, her voice trembling slightly. Linda arrived to drive her to the train station. "You look beautiful," Linda said as Margaret climbed into the car, her voice filled with genuine admiration. Margaret smiled, though her hands fidgeted nervously in her lap. "Thank you, Linda, for everything." The drive to the station was filled with a mix of light conversation and comfortable silence. When they arrived, Margaret turned to her friend, her eyes misty. "I don't know what I'd do without you," she said softly. "You'll be just fine," Linda replied, pulling her into a tight hug. "Go show them the amazing woman you are." As Margaret boarded the train and settled into her seat, she watched Maplewood fade into the distance. The rhythmic clatter of the train's wheels echoed her racing thoughts. Despite her doubts and fears, one thing remained clear. She had to see Aaron again. The train rumbled steadily along the tracks, carrying Margaret further from Maplewood and closer to the sprawling city where Aaron now lived. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels filled the compartment, but Margaret barely noticed. Her thoughts were consumed by what lay ahead: Aaron, the wedding, and the answer she longed for but feared to find. Her suitcase sat securely on the luggage rack above her, while the invitation rested on her lap. The thick cardstock and embossed golden lettering were at odds with the modest fabric of her dress, a stark reminder of the differences that now defined their lives. She glanced out the window at the changing landscape. The familiar rolling hills and quaint farmhouses of Maplewood gradually gave way to vast stretches of highway, bustling suburbs, and eventually the towering skyscrapers of the city. Margaret couldn't help but feel like a stranger in this new world, so different from the quiet town she called home. Across the aisle, an older woman with a kind smile watched her curiously. Finally, the woman leaned over. "Heading to the city?" Margaret nodded, tucking the invitation back into her purse. "Yes, for my son's wedding." "How exciting," the woman said brightly. "You must be so proud." Margaret hesitated, forcing a smile. "I am. It's just been a long time since we've seen each other." The woman's smile softened with understanding. "Weddings have a way of bringing people back together. I'm sure it'll be wonderful." Margaret nodded politely, but her chest tightened with uncertainty. She wanted to believe those words, but doubt clung to her like a shadow. The train pulled into the station as dusk settled over the city, the sky painted in hues of orange and purple. Margaret stepped off, clutching her small suitcase tightly as she navigated the crowded platform. The noise and energy of the city were overwhelming, a far cry from the quiet streets of Maplewood. She hailed a taxi and gave the driver the address listed on the invitation. As they wound through the busy streets, Margaret's nerves grew with every passing block. The Carter estate was nothing like Margaret had imagined. It was even grander. As the taxi approached the wrought iron gates, her breath caught. Behind the gates stretched a long driveway lined with perfectly manicured hedges, leading to a mansion that looked as though it had been plucked straight from a fairy tale. Its tall windows glowed warmly in the fading light, while fountains and statues adorned the sprawling gardens. Margaret paid the driver and stepped out, clutching her suitcase as she approached the gates. Two uniformed guards stood watch, their stern expressions softening slightly as she presented the invitation. "Welcome, Mrs. Johnson," one of them said after checking her name against a list. The gates creaked open, and Margaret walked through, her steps hesitant. The mansion loomed larger with each step. Margaret couldn't help but feel small and out of place amidst the grandeur. She smoothed her dress, trying to summon the quiet dignity that had carried her through life's challenges. At the entrance, a sharply dressed butler greeted her. "Mrs. Margaret Johnson?" "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Right this way, ma'am." The butler led Margaret into the grand foyer, where a massive crystal chandelier sparkled above her head. The floors gleamed like mirrors, and the walls were adorned with intricate moldings and towering portraits of stern-faced ancestors. Margaret couldn't help but feel as though she were trespassing. This was Aaron's world, now one of opulence and power, far removed from the life they had once shared. "Please wait here," the butler said, gesturing to a nearby sitting room. Margaret stepped inside, her gaze drifting over the elegant furniture and delicate floral arrangements. She perched on the edge of an upholstered chair, her hands resting nervously in her lap. The sound of footsteps drew her attention, and a young woman entered the room. She was beautiful, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a tailored dress that seemed to belong to the room itself. "You must be Margaret," the woman said, her smile warm but calculated. Margaret stood, offering a polite nod. "Yes, and you must be Emily." Emily's smile widened as she extended her hand. "It's so lovely to finally meet you. Aaron's told me so much about you." Margaret's heart fluttered at the mention of Aaron. "I'm glad to be here," she said, though her voice was tinged with uncertainty. Emily gestured for Margaret to sit. "I hope the journey wasn't too tiring. I know it's a long trip from Maplewood, isn't it?" "Yes," Margaret replied, noting the faint condescension in Emily's tone. Emily continued, her voice light and conversational. Aaron speaks so fondly of his hometown. It must be such a charming place. Margaret forced a smile, unsure how to respond. Before she could find the words, the sound of more footsteps filled the room. She turned to see Aaron enter, his presence commanding despite the casual way he carried himself. "Mom," he said, his voice a mix of surprise and awkwardness. Margaret's breath caught. He looked older, more polished, with his tailored suit and carefully styled hair. But his eyes, those were still the same, though they lacked the warmth she remembered. "Aaron," she said, rising to meet him. He embraced her briefly, his touch tentative. "I'm glad you came," he said, though his tone didn't entirely match his words. Emily stepped beside him, slipping her hand into his. "Aaron, your mother was just telling me about Maplewood. It sounds so quaint." Aaron nodded, his smile faint. "It is quiet and simple." Margaret felt a pang at his dismissive tone, but chose not to dwell on it. She had come here to reconnect, not to confront. The conversation shifted to the wedding plans, with Emily leading the discussion. Margaret listened politely, but her mind wandered. She studied Aaron, searching for traces of the boy she had raised. He seemed happy on the surface, but something in his eyes told a different story, something guarded, almost distant. As the evening wore on, Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. She noticed the subtle tension in Aaron's posture, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes. She noticed how Emily seemed to steer every conversation, her polished demeanor masking something colder. Margaret retired to her guest room early, needing a moment to collect her thoughts. The room was exquisite, with a four-poster bed and a view of the sprawling gardens. Yet it felt strangely impersonal, as though she were a visitor in a museum. She sat by the window, watching the lights of the mansion glow against the night sky. Her thoughts drifted to Maplewood, to the cozy home that had always felt like a refuge. She missed its warmth, its familiarity. A soft knock at the door startled her. "Come in," she called. The door opened, and a young maid stepped inside. "Mrs. Johnson, I brought you some tea," she said, setting a tray on the bedside table. "Thank you," Margaret said, her voice warm. The maid hesitated, glancing around the room. "It's nice to see someone like you here," she said quietly, her words tinged with something unspoken. Margaret tilted her head. "What do you mean?" The maid hesitated, then shook her head. "Nothing, ma'am. Just enjoy your stay." As the maid left, Margaret couldn't help but feel that her words carried a warning. The next morning, Margaret rose early, her night of restless sleep leaving her both tired and on edge. The soft light of dawn spilled through the window, illuminating the elegant guest room. She took her time dressing, choosing a modest outfit that she hoped conveyed quiet dignity. The mansion was already alive with activity as she ventured downstairs. The staff bustled about, arranging flowers and polishing silverware, their movements brisk and efficient. Margaret found herself lingering in the grand foyer, watching the preparations with a mix of awe and unease. As she stood there, a voice called out behind her. "Mrs. Johnson, good morning." Margaret turned to see Emily descending the grand staircase, her radiant smile firmly in place. She wore a pale blue dress that seemed effortlessly regal, her every movement poised and deliberate. "Good morning, Emily," Margaret replied politely. "I hope you slept well," Emily said as she reached Margaret. "Today's a big day. The rehearsal dinner is tonight, and of course, tomorrow is the wedding." Margaret forced a smile, though her heart felt heavy. "Everything looks beautiful," she said, gesturing to the floral arrangements. Emily's smile widened. "Thank you. I've worked so hard to ensure everything is perfect. This wedding means so much not just to Aaron and me, but to our families." Margaret's brow furrowed slightly at the emphasis Emily placed on family. There was something unnerving about the way she spoke, as though the union were less about love and more about appearances. "Have you had a chance to spend time with Aaron yet?" Margaret asked, steering the conversation to what mattered most to her. Emily's smile faltered for the briefest moment before she recovered. "Aaron's been very busy with last-minute details, but I'm sure he'll have some time later today." He's so dedicated to making everything perfect for us. Margaret nodded, but doubt lingered in her mind. She wasn't sure what to make of Emily. On the surface, she was charming and polite, but there was a sharpness beneath her words that Margaret couldn't ignore. Later that afternoon, Margaret wandered the estate's gardens, seeking a moment of peace amidst the grandeur. The neatly trimmed hedges and vibrant flowers were stunning, but they felt as though they belonged in a painting rather than real life. As she turned a corner, she spotted a small figure sitting on a stone bench beneath a willow tree. It was a young girl, her dark hair falling in soft curls around her face. She clutched a stuffed rabbit to her chest, her gaze fixed on the ground. Margaret hesitated before approaching. "Hello there," she said gently. The girl looked up, her wide, tear-filled eyes meeting Margaret's. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Margaret asked, her voice kind. "Lily," the girl replied softly. Margaret's heart ached at the sadness in Lily's voice. "What's wrong, Lily? Why are you sitting here all alone?" Lily hesitated, glancing around as though checking to see if anyone was watching. "I don't want to go away," she whispered. "Go away? Where?" Margaret asked, kneeling beside her. Lily's grip on the rabbit tightened. "Miss Emily says I have to leave after the wedding. She says I'm going to a school far away." Margaret felt a pang of anger mixed with sorrow. "Do you want to go to that school?" Lily shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "No, I want to stay here. I want to stay with my dad. Margaret is briscooked." "Your dad?" Lily nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "Aaron, he's my dad." The world seemed to tilt beneath Margaret's feet as she processed Lily's words. She stared at the girl, her mind racing. Aaron had never mentioned a daughter. How could he not know? Before Margaret could ask more, a sharp voice called out, "Lily!" Both Margaret and Lily turned to see a maid approaching, her expression stern. "Come inside at once," the maid said, taking Lily's hand. Margaret stood, her heart pounding as she watched them leave. Lily glanced over her shoulder, her eyes full of fear. As the maid and Lily disappeared into the house, Margaret felt a heavy weight settle in her chest. Something was deeply wrong, and she couldn't ignore it. Margaret spent the rest of the day preoccupied with thoughts of Lily. The child's tearful words echoed in her mind, raising questions she couldn't answer. Why had Aaron never told her about Lily? Did he even know? And why was Emily intent on sending the girl away? Determined to find the truth, Margaret decided to confide in someone. She sought out Anna, the young maid who had brought her tea the night before. Anna was folding linens in the servants' quarters when Margaret approached her. "Anna," Margaret said softly, "I need your help." Anna looked up, her eyes widening slightly. "What is it, ma'am?" "It's about Lily," Margaret said, lowering her voice. "She told me Aaron is her father. Is that true?" Anna hesitated, glancing around to make sure they were alone. Mom, it's true, but Mr. Johnson doesn't know." Miss Emily and her father made sure of that. Margaret's heart sank. Why would they hide something so important? Anna leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because if Aaron knew, everything would change. The Carters have a plan for him, and Lily doesn't fit into it. They're sending her away to keep her out of sight." Margaret felt a surge of anger. "That's cruel. She's just a child." Anna nodded, her expression sad. "I've tried to look out for her, but there's only so much I can do. Miss Emily has too much control." Margaret's mind raced. She had to find a way to help Lily and to tell Aaron the truth. But she needed proof, something undeniable that would force the Carters to reveal their lies. "Anna," Margaret said, her voice steady, "do you know where they keep important documents? Letters, anything that might prove what they've done?" Anna hesitated, then nodded. "Mr. Carter has a private office upstairs. He keeps everything locked away, but I know where the key is." Margaret placed a hand on Anna's shoulder. "Will you help me?" Anna nodded again, her voice firm. "Yes, Lily deserves better than this." That evening, as the mansion buzzed with preparations for the rehearsal dinner, Margaret and Anna put their plan into motion. Anna retrieved the key from its hiding place, a small compartment behind a vase in the hallway, and handed it to Margaret. "The office is at the end of the east wing," she whispered. "I'll keep watch." Margaret nodded, her heart pounding as she made her way to the office. The corridor was dimly lit, and every creak of the floorboards seemed deafening. She reached the door, unlocked it, and slipped inside. The room was imposing, its walls lined with bookshelves and the air heavy with the scent of leather and wood polish. Margaret wasted no time, opening drawers and sifting through papers. Finally, she found what she was looking for, a bundle of letters tied with a ribbon. As she read the top letter, her breath caught. It was from Rachel, Lily's late mother. "Aaron, you deserve to know the truth. Lily is your daughter. Please, don't let her grow up believing she's unloved." Tears filled Margaret's eyes as she read Rachel's heartfelt plea. Behind the letters was another document, Aaron's original will, naming Lily as his heir. Margaret clutched the papers tightly, knowing she had found the proof she needed. She slipped them into her purse and left the office, her resolve stronger than ever. She had to tell Aaron the truth, no matter the consequences. The rehearsal dinner was a grand affair, held in the Carter Estate's opulent ballroom. Margaret arrived late, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had uncovered. The bundle of letters and Aaron's original will be tucked securely into her purse, and she clutched it tightly as she entered the room. The ballroom was a sight to behold. Golden chandeliers cast a warm glow over elegantly dressed guests, their conversations blending with the soft strains of a live string quartet. The tables were adorned with pristine white linens, and the scent of fresh roses filled the air. Margaret felt out of place amidst the grandeur, her modest dress contrasting sharply with the designer gowns and tailored suits around her. She scanned the room for Aaron, her pulse quickening when she spotted him near the head table with Emily by his side. Aaron looked tense, his shoulders stiff, as he exchanged polite smiles with the guests who approached him. Emily, by contrast, was the picture of ease, her charm on full display as she navigated the crowd. Margaret approached cautiously, her heart pounding. She was determined to tell Aaron the truth, but the timing had to be right. As Margaret neared the head table, Emily intercepted her with a radiant smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mrs. Johnson," Emily said warmly, though her tone was laced with something colder. "I hope you're enjoying the evening." Margaret forced a polite smile. "It's lovely." Emily's eyes flickered to Margaret's purse, her expression tightening for a split second before she recovered. "I'm glad you could be here for Aaron. He's been so busy, but this is such an important moment for him and for us." Margaret nodded, her grip on her purse tightening. "I'd like to speak with Aaron, if that's all right." Emily hesitated, then gestured toward Aaron with a practiced smile. "Of course. He's just over there." As Margaret moved past her, Emily's gaze followed her, sharp and calculating. Margaret approached Aaron, who looked up in surprise when he saw her. "Mom," he said, his voice a mix of warmth and awkwardness. "I wasn't expecting you to come over." Margaret smiled faintly. "I needed to speak with you, Aaron. It's important." Aaron glanced around at the crowded room. "Now, can it wait until after?" "No," Margaret interrupted gently, but firmly. "It can't." Aaron's brow furrowed, but he nodded. "All right, let's step outside." They made their way to a quiet terrace overlooking the gardens. The cool evening air was a welcome contrast to the stifling atmosphere inside. "What's this about, Mom?" Aaron asked, his tone cautious. Margaret reached in her purse and pulled out the bundle of letters. Her hands trembled as she offered them to him. "Aaron, you need to see these. They're from Rachel." Aaron's eyes widened as he took the letters. "Rachel," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Margaret said softly. "Lily's mother." Aaron stared at the first letter, his face pale as he began to read. The words seemed to hit him like a physical blow, and he staggered back, his breath quickening. She's my daughter?" Aaron whispered, his voice breaking. Margaret nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Yes, Aaron. And Emily and her family have been hiding her from you. They've kept her in this house, planning to send her away after the wedding." Aaron's hands trembled as he read the letters, his disbelief giving way to anger and heartbreak. How could they? How could she? Margaret placed a comforting hand on his arm. "You deserve to know the truth, Aaron, and Lily deserves her father." Aaron's grief quickly turned to fury as he folded the letters and placed them in his pocket. "I need to talk to Emily," he said, his voice low and steady. Margaret followed him back inside, her heart pounding as she prepared for the confrontation that was about to unfold. Emily was at the head table, laughing with a group of guests, but her smile faltered when she saw Aaron approaching. His expression was grim, his posture rigid with barely contained rage. "Aaron," Emily began, her voice light but wary. "What's wrong?" Aaron held up one of the letters, his hand trembling with anger. "You lied to me, Emily. You kept my daughter from me." The room fell silent as the guests turned to watch, their conversations fading into stunned whispers. Emily's eyes widened, but she quickly recovered, her expression turning cold. "Aaron, please. Let's not do this here." "No," Aaron said firmly, his voice rising. "We're doing this now. You lied to me, manipulated me, and tried to take my daughter away. How could you?" Emily glanced around at the watching guests, her composure slipping. "Aaron, I was trying to protect you." Rachel was unstable, and Lily would have been a distraction. A distraction? Aaron's voice was a roar now, echoing through the ballroom. "She's my child, Emily. My family. And you thought you had the right to erase her from my life." William Carter stepped forward, his deep voice calm but commanding. "Aaron, let's not make a scene. This is a private matter that can be discussed later." Aaron turned on him, his fury unrelenting. "Private? You've been manipulating me from the start, using my career and my ambitions to control me. Well, it ends now." The murmurs among the guests grew louder, their shock and disapproval evident. Margaret stood at Aaron's side, her presence a steady source of strength as he confronted the people who had betrayed him. Emily's polished veneer crumbled as she stepped closer to Aaron, her voice desperate. "Aaron, please. I love you. Everything I did was for us, for our future." Aaron shook his head, his expression filled with disgust. "No, Emily. You did it for yourself. And as of right now, this wedding is over." Aaron turned to Margaret, his anger giving way to determination. "I need to see Lily," he said. Margaret nodded, her heart swelling with pride as she watched her son reclaim his life and his family. Together, they left the ballroom, leaving behind the stunned guests and the shattered remains of the Carter family's schemes. Aaron strode through the halls of the Carter mansion with Margaret close behind. His heart pounded as he approached the small sitting room where he had been told Lily was waiting. Each step felt heavier than the last, the weight of guilt and anticipation nearly overwhelming him. Margaret placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Aaron," she said softly, "take a deep breath. She's been waiting for this moment as much as you have." Aaron nodded, though his jaw remained tight. He stopped in front of the door, his hand hovering over the handle. For a moment, he hesitated, unsure of what to say or how to make up for all the lost time. "She's just a little girl," Margaret said, sensing his hesitation. "She doesn't need perfection. She just needs her dad." Aaron drew in a deep breath and pushed the door open. Inside, Lily sat curled up on a cushioned armchair, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Her dark hair framed her face, and her big eyes looked up as the door creaked open. At first, there was fear in her gaze, but when she saw Margaret, her expression softened. "Grandma," Lily said softly, sliding off the chair and taking a tentative step forward. Margaret knelt down, opening her arms. "I'm here, sweetheart," she said. Lily ran into her embrace, burying her face in Margaret's shoulder. Margaret held her tightly, stroking her hair and whispering reassurances. Aaron stood a few steps behind, his chest tightening as he watched. "Lily," he said, his voice trembling. The little girl peeked out from Margaret's arms, her eyes widening as she looked at him. "Hi," Aaron said softly, crouching down to her level. I'm your dad." Lily blinked, clutching her rabbit tighter. "You're my dad?" she asked, her voice filled with both wonder and doubt. Aaron nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Yes, sweetheart, and I'm so sorry I wasn't there for you. I didn't know about you, but now that I do, I promise I'll never let you go." Lily studied him for a long moment, her small face filled with emotions too complex for her age. Slowly, she took a step forward, then another, "Do you really want me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Aaron's heart broke at the question. He opened his arms. More than anything, Lily hesitated for only a moment before rushing into his embrace. Aaron held her tightly, his tears soaking into her hair. "I love you, Lily," he whispered. "I'm here now, and I'll never leave you." Margaret watched them with tears in her own eyes, her heart swelling with pride and relief. The following morning, Aaron packed his belongings, intent on leaving the Carter estate for good. Margaret helped Lily gather her things, the little girl excitedly chattering about the new home they would share. Aaron stood at the foot of the grand staircase, looking up at the mansion one last time. Emily appeared at the top of the stairs, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. "You don't have to do this," Emily said, her voice raw. "We can fix this, Aaron. We can still have everything we planned." Aaron shook his head, his expression resolute. "The only thing I want now is my daughter and my family. You and your father tried to take that from me, and I can't forgive that." Emily descended the stairs, desperation in her every step. "Please, Aaron, don't walk away from this. From us." "There is no us," Aaron said firmly. "Not anymore." With that, he turned and walked out the door, Margaret and Lily following close behind. The sunlight was warm as they stepped outside, the weight of the Carter family's control finally lifting. Aaron took a deep breath, savoring the fresh air and the freedom that came with it. Margaret placed a hand on his shoulder. "Are you ready?" she asked gently. Aaron looked down at Lily, who smiled up at him, her eyes shining with trust and love. He nodded. "Let's go home." Back in Maplewood, Aaron and Margaret worked together to create a new life for Lily. They found a small, cozy house on the edge of town with a picket fence and a yard where Lily could play. The house was modest compared to the Carter estate, but it was filled with warmth and love. Margaret took pride in decorating it with family photos and handmade quilts, while Aaron focused on creating a safe and happy space for Lily. Lily adjusted quickly to her new life, her laughter filling the house as she explored her surroundings. She started school at the local elementary, where she made friends and began to thrive. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Lily looked up at Aaron with a serious expression. "Are you happy, Daddy?" Aaron smiled, his heart swelling with emotion. "I am, sweetheart. I'm the happiest I've ever been." Margaret watched them with a contented smile. The journey had been difficult, but it had brought them to a place of healing and hope. Over time, Aaron grew into his role as a father, learning to balance work and family. He took a job at a local law firm, using his skills to help the community. Margaret continued to be a pillar of support, her love and wisdom guiding both Aaron and Lily as they navigated their new lives. One afternoon, as Aaron and Lily played catch in the yard, Margaret sat on the porch, knitting a new blanket for Lily's bed. She watched them with a smile, her heart full. "Grandma," Lily called, running over to her. "Come play with us." Margaret laughed, setting her knitting aside. "All right, but don't throw too hard." As the three of them played together, their laughter echoed through the yard, a testament to the strength of their bond. Years later, Aaron sat on the porch with Margaret, watching Lily ride her bike down the street with her friends. The once timid girl had grown into a confident and joyful child, her spirit unbroken by the challenges she had faced. Aaron turned to Margaret, his expression serious. "Mom, I want you to know how much I appreciate everything you've done for me. I wouldn't be here without you." Margaret placed a hand on his. "You've always had the strength, Aaron. You just needed to find it again." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the town, Margaret felt a deep sense of peace. Her family was whole again, and their love would carry them forward, no matter what challenges lay ahead. Aaron's return to Maplewood didn't go unnoticed. The quiet town had a way of embracing its own, even those who had been gone for years. When word spread that Aaron was back, and with a daughter Margaret's small circle of friends rallied to help them settle in. At the local general store, Mrs. Peterson insisted on giving Aaron a discount on house supplies. "Consider it a welcome home gift," she said, smiling warmly. Down the street, Mr. Carpenter offered to repair the squeaky fence at their new house. "No charge," he said gruffly. "Just glad to see you back where you belong." Aaron was overwhelmed by the kindness of the townsfolk. It was a stark contrast to the cold, transactional world he had left behind. For the first time in years, he felt like he belonged. Lily, too, was welcomed with open arms. Her shy demeanor melted away as she made friends at the playground and charmed the neighbors with her bright smile. One afternoon, as Aaron watched Lily play with a group of children in the park, Margaret sat beside him on the bench. "This town has a way of healing people," Margaret said softly, her gaze fixed on Lily. Aaron nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's strange. I spent so long trying to get away from this place, and now it feels like exactly where I'm supposed to be." Margaret smiled, her hand resting on his. "Sometimes, it takes leaving to realize where home truly is." Despite the warmth of Maplewood, Aaron couldn't fully escape the shadow of his past. Emily and her father, William, had tried to contact him several times since he left the Carter estate, but Aaron ignored their calls and emails. However, one afternoon, a letter arrived at the house. Margaret found it in the mailbox and hesitated before handing it to Aaron. "It's from the Carters," she said, her voice tinged with concern. Aaron opened the envelope with a sense of dread. The letter was from William, its tone both apologetic and threatening. "Aaron, we regret how things transpired, but we need to discuss the financial fallout of your departure. Walking away from the business and the wedding has consequences. Let's resolve this amicably before it becomes a legal matter." Aaron clenched his jaw, the weight of William's words pressing down on him. He had known there would be fallout, but seeing it in writing made it all the more real. "What are you going to do?" Margaret asked gently. Aaron sighed, setting the letter down. "I'll deal with it, but I'm not letting them drag me back into their world. Lily and I deserve better." Margaret nodded, pride evident in her expression. "You've come so far, Aaron. Don't let them pull you back." Aaron reached across the table, taking her hand. "I won't, Mom. I promise." Aaron threw himself into his new life with determination. He found work at a local law firm, focusing on family and community cases. The job was less prestigious than his previous position, but it was meaningful, and it allowed him to spend more time with Lily. Lily thrived in Maplewood. She joined the school's art club, where she discovered a talent for drawing. One day, she proudly showed Aaron a picture she had drawn of their family, Aaron and Margaret standing in front of their new home. "This is beautiful, Lily," Aaron said, his voice thick with emotion. "Do you like it, Daddy?" Lily asked, her eyes shining with hope. Aaron hugged her tightly. "I love it. I'm going to frame it and hang it in the living room." Margaret watched the interaction with a smile, her heart swelling with pride. She knew Aaron was still healing, but he was becoming the father Lily needed and the son she had always believed he could be. One evening, as the family sat down to dinner, a knock at the door interrupted their meal. Aaron opened the door to find Emily standing on the porch, her expression a mix of desperation and defiance. "What are you doing here?" Aaron asked, his tone guarded. Emily stepped forward, her eyes darting past him to the cozy interior of the house. "Aaron, I came to talk. Please, just hear me out." Aaron hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in. Margaret and Lily watched from the table, their expressions wary. Emily's gaze softened when she saw Lily. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, her voice uncharacteristically gentle. Lily frowned and moved closer to Margaret, clutching her grandmother's hand. Aaron crossed his arms. "What do you want, Emily?" Emily sighed, her composure faltering. "I made mistakes, Aaron. I know that. But my father, he pushed me to do things I didn't want to. I was scared of losing everything, and I let that fear control me." Aaron's expression hardened. "Fear doesn't justify what you did. You kept my daughter from me. You lied to me." Emily nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I know, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But I want to make things right. I want to be part of Lily's life." Aaron glanced at Margaret, who gave him a steady look. "You don't get to decide that," Aaron said firmly. "Lily's life isn't a bargaining chip. If you want to be part of her life, it'll be on her terms, not yours." Emily's face crumpled, but she nodded. "I understand. Thank you, Aaron." As she left, Aaron closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling deeply. Margaret approached him, placing a comforting hand on his arm. "You handled that well," she said. Aaron nodded, his gaze distant. I'm just glad it's over. Months passed, and the wounds left by the Carters began to fade. Aaron, Margaret, and Lily found joy in the simple pleasures of life: family dinners, Sunday picnics, and quiet evenings by the fire. One sunny afternoon, Aaron and Lily worked together to plant a small garden in their backyard. Margaret watched from the porch, knitting a scarf for Lily as the sound of laughter filled the air. "Grandma," Lily called, running over to show her a handful of freshly picked flowers. Margaret took the flowers, her smile wide. "These are beautiful, Lily. Just like you." Aaron joined them, wiping dirt from his hands. "We're going to have the best garden in Maplewood," he said proudly. Margaret chuckled. "You already have the best family. That's what matters." As the three of them stood together, surrounded by the warmth of the afternoon sun, Aaron felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He glanced at Margaret, his voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Mom, for everything." Margaret placed a hand on his shoulder, her eyes shining. "You've always been my boy, Aaron, and now you're the man I always knew you could be." Aaron looked at Lily, who was arranging her flowers on the porch. "I just want to give her the life she deserves." "You already are," Margaret said softly. Together, they watched Lily play, the promise of a brighter future shining as brightly as the sun overhead. The years passed gently in Maplewood, each one marked by small but meaningful milestones in the Johnson family's life. Their home became a haven of joy and warmth, a place where laughter echoed through the walls and love rooted itself deeply. Lily blossomed into a confident and creative young girl, her artistic talents growing with every passing year. Her bedroom walls became a gallery of her drawings, pictures of her family, the garden they'd planted, and the town she now called home. One quiet evening, Margaret sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The warm hues of twilight painted the sky, casting a golden glow over the yard where Aaron and Lily played a spirited game of catch. Margaret's heart swelled as she watched them. This was the life she had always hoped for, a life filled with connection, love, and the quiet contentment of a family reunited. "Grandma," Lily called, bounding up the steps with her ever-present enthusiasm. "Look what I found!" She held out a small flower, its delicate petals a vibrant shade of purple. Margaret smiled, taking the flower from Lily's outstretched hand. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Just like you." Aaron joined them, wiping his hands on his jeans as he took a seat beside Margaret. "She's been picking flowers all day," he said with a chuckle. "They're for the table," Lily said proudly. "I wanted to look nice for dinner." Margaret and Aaron exchanged a smile, their unspoken gratitude for moments like these filling the air between them. One weekend, Aaron suggested they visit Margaret's old home, the one he grew up in before moving to the city. The house had been sold years ago, but Aaron wanted to show Lily where his journey had begun. As they pulled into the driveway, memories flooded back from Margaret and Aaron. The small house stood as a reminder of the struggles they had endured and the love that had carried them through. "This is where you live?" Lily asked, her wide eyes taking in the modest home. "Yes," Aaron said, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "Your grandma worked so hard to make this a happy place. She gave me everything I needed, even when times were tough." Margaret placed a hand on Aaron's shoulder, her eyes glistening. "And look at how far you've come, Aaron. That's what matters." Lily ran to the small garden bed that still lined the front yard, plucking a single flower and holding it up. "Can we take this home, Grandma?" Margaret laughed, nodding. "Of course, sweetheart." As they left, Aaron glanced back at the house one last time. It wasn't just a building, it was a testament to resilience and the foundation of the life they now cherished. Margaret's role in the family remained as strong as ever. She became Lily's confidant, Aaron's advisor, and the heart of their home. She spent her days baking, gardening, and sharing stories from her past that always left Lily wide-eyed with wonder. One afternoon, as Margaret and Lily sat in the living room, Margaret handed Lily a small wooden box. "This is for you," Margaret said, her voice soft. Lily opened the box to find a delicate necklace with a tiny heart pendant. "It was your grandfather's last gift to me," Margaret explained. "I want you to have it now." Lily's eyes filled with tears as she carefully put on the necklace. "Thank you, Grandma," she whispered, hugging Margaret tightly. Aaron stood in the doorway, watching the scene with a lump in his throat. He knew that Margaret's love was the glue that held their family together. As Lily grew older, she began to understand the sacrifices her family had made for her happiness. One day, she presented Margaret and Aaron with a painting she had spent weeks working on. The painting depicted their family standing in front of their house, surrounded by the garden they had planted together. Above them, a glowing sun bathed everything in golden light. "This is us," Lily said, beaming with pride. "It's how I see our family happy and full of love." Margaret's eyes filled with tears as she hugged Lily. "It's perfect, sweetheart, just like our family." Aaron hung the painting in the living room, where it became a centerpiece, a daily reminder of their journey and the love that had brought them to where they were. Years later, when Margaret's hair was fully silver and Lily was a young woman ready to embark on her own adventures, the family remained as close as ever. Margaret's wisdom and love continued to guide Aaron and Lily, her legacy woven into the fabric of their lives. On a quiet evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars, Aaron turned to his mother. "Mom," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "thank you for never giving up on me. I wouldn't be here without you." Margaret smiled, her eyes glistening. "You're my son, Aaron. My love for you never wavered, even when times were hard. And now, seeing the life you've built with Lily, it makes everything worthwhile." As the stars twinkled above them, the Johnson family sat together, their hearts full of gratitude for the journey they had shared. The road had been difficult, but it had led them to a place of peace, love, and belonging, a testament to the strength of a mother's promise and the enduring power of family. As the Johnson family sat together under the starlit sky, their journey of resilience and love reminded us all of the power of forgiveness, second chances, and the unbreakable bonds of family. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt tales of courage, hope, and redemption. Your support helps us share more stories that inspire and remind us all of the beauty in life's challenges. Hit the like button, leave a comment to share your thoughts, and don't forget to share this story with someone who might need a little reminder of the strength of love and family. Thank you for being part of our community. Until next time, take care and cherish the moments that truly matter.